Welcome to part two, the first episode of Mikefox Comic School. In part one, we discussed passion for making comics, and we're going to jump into the rest of that right now with motivation.
So that brings us to the next topic, motivation. Motivation is a tough one. It has so many broad applications. Yeah, when someone wants to draw comics, obviously they're motivated to make them simply by the fact that they go, hey, I want to draw comics. And one may be motivated to draw comics to tell stories, like we said. But the type of motivation I mean is a little less broad. I mean the mental process by which you take time out of your day to sit down and complete the task of making your product. Uh, and as I said, if this isn't easy for you, you're completely regular, alright? Until it becomes a habit, you're going to have to find the motivation to motivate yourself on some days. Every artist has had the guilty moment where they drew for 20 minutes, got bored, and went to go play a game, watch a movie, see friends, and that's okay. We all have a really sincere urge to go draw, but then we sit down at the table and we can't, seem to get ourselves to stop talking online, fiddling with gadgets, or actually begin the work. And then before you know it, it's time for bed and you have to try all over again tomorrow. And motivation is a difficult task to talk about in a practical sense. And obviously, that's because the subject has become sort of a joke after decades of motivational speakers who sell you pre-packaged systems guaranteed to almost do the work of getting motivation for you. And motivation isn't a paint by numbers game. It won't happen if you just follow any given guideline. It can mean a lot of trial and error as you're developing your sense of motivation. You need to be a little easy on yourself, but I promise I will tell you some good things you can do and try, and ways to think about it where you can find your own path to motivation. And it's a weird beast because you're not looking for a motivation to want to do a project. Obviously, you already want to do a project. You're looking for the motivation to do the work required to finish a project, which is a whole different thing. Yes, I want to have a comic, but getting out of my chair to sit and sketch my characters for 4 hours, knowing at the end of the day I'll have nothing I can actually call a comic, it loses some of the luster, even though that work does have to be done while you're developing your book. You may really want to publish a new page, but you know how much work drawing is, and you may be intimidated by the difficult task ahead of you, and you might hesitate to start. I have this problem a lot when I finish an issue of my comic. I get to the end of 20-odd pages of intense drawing, coloring, inking. I've had the emotional payoff of releasing the comic into the wild, and then starting all over again from nothing and knowing I'll get no feedback, no pat on the back, nothing to keep me going for a while. I have to work in a vacuum and draw for days and days before I can get anything out of it. And I think every artist has struggled with the idea of finding the motivation to get off your ass. You can sometimes force yourself to do it, but that only gets you so far. If sitting in front of a computer every day to draw feels like a chore because you're forcing yourself to do it, then it's just like working a day job and you didn't decide you wanted to do comics because you needed a second day job. So what you need to do is change your relationship with the work. You can control that. Fun story time here. When I took psilocybin, magic mushrooms, for the first time, I stared at a power cord behind my TV for about an hour, just mesmerized by it, seeing the twists and turns, the way the light traveled down the shiny rubber like droplets of water, and the way it was just, in one sense, just a long string of black, a straight line, but in its present state it was complicated, a knot. Was the cord more interesting than when I wasn't on mushrooms? No. So what changed? The cord didn't change. What changed was my relationship with it, my way of looking at it. Side note, doing mushrooms is fun, but it won't get your comic done, so don't take that as advice. Now, this isn't just something you can sit on your couch and do in your head. You can't sit, close your eyes, decide you feel different about the act of drawing, and boom, you're cured. For example, the best advice I actually ever did get was consider yourself a professional and act like it. Well, okay, great. I mean, the idea is being you sit down at your computer, you imagine yourself, you picture yourself as a professional artist, and you treat your work professionally and it changes your attitude. But do I just sit down one day and go, gosh, I'm a pro, and suddenly I have an endless font of motivation to get up and draw till 1 a.m. every day? No, of course not. That's not that easy. But there is an incredible connection between our mind and our body that is often overlooked as a tool to make changes in your life. And there is a process by which you can do that to help affect change in your relationship with the physical act of sitting down to draw. And okay, that sounds a little heady, but I had the benefit of being into the care of a professional therapist when I went through this process. And this was a specific thing we worked on at the time. But I love you guys, so I'm going to give it to you without the $120 an hour bill at the end of the video. Our body has memory, not just our brains. And our brains listen to our body memory and respond. So if you have a physical act which causes you some kind of distress and your body locks that in, your brain is going to create an aversion to doing that physical act. Did you feel bad about your last drawing and now you can't seem to get up and try again? Well, that's why. Your body locked in those feelings. Your art didn't turn out so good. So when you get in the physical space to go draw, your brain acts on that and says, no, you don't want to do this. And it works against you. So how do you motivate yourself with this knowledge? The trick is to discover what feelings are keeping you from drawing. These days, I have zero trouble sitting down to draw, and it used to be a real challenge. I think about it all day. I zip upstairs to my desk like an excited kid, and the trick for me was changing how I looked at it by changing my relationship with the physical act of drawing. I had some ugly childhood experiences, and when I sat down to draw, I felt guilt. I felt I didn't deserve to be an artist. I felt I was a phony, that I wasn't enough. Folks like me don't get to thrive. So when I sat down to draw, I had no idea I was bringing up all those feelings. That's why I didn't want to put myself in that chair and didn't want to put myself through the act of experiencing that pain to get to the drawing part. But I didn't know that. I just knew I, would sit on the couch and go, I don't feel like it. But so how did I find out that I had those specific feelings when I sat down to draw? It's a mixture of two things that if you want to Google, professionals call it somatic experiencing and mindfulness. The too long didn't read is taking a moment to stop and really focus on yourself. What are your muscles doing? What feeling does that give you? When you take the pen in your hand, what feeling does that give you? Sit and listen to your body. And it might take a while. But what trouble is it giving you? Where is the pain that is preventing you from drawing? And it can take many tries. And the best thing to do, if you want to look at a process you can begin yourself, is to sit quietly in a place away from your art station. Sit and think about getting up to draw and pay attention. What do you feel in your body when you think about drawing? Okay, where is that feeling? What do you feel emotionally? Is that a feeling you want to avoid? Is it guilt, anxiety, pain? When you discover a feeling, and you won't always on the first try, stay with it. Let yourself feel it. If it's anxiety, be anxious. Let yourself completely own that feeling and understand it. Then think, okay, if I could do anything in the world to make this feeling go away, what would it be? And then imagine doing that. If you can physically do it, great, but likely you'll want to imagine it. Imagine crushing that feeling however you like. Then, get up, go to your chair, sit down, start the process over again. How do you feel in your chair? Where do you feel it? Etc. Take the pen. How do you feel? Where do you feel it? If you could do anything to stop the feeling preventing you from drawing, what would it be? Visualize it. Start drawing. What do you feel? Etc. Repeat. And this may take days, honestly. Spend 20 minutes a day doing this until you think you've fully processed the problem and completely understand the physical and emotional barriers that you have to doing the work. And then you can begin to unravel them. And just, as sort of a general guide, for me, as I said, it was a feeling of guilt that kept me from working for years. The traumatic history I alluded to ended my passion for drawing for 20 years. I felt like I had given up and did not deserve to draw, like I was a failure. So, my therapist suggested I become the artist my childhood self deserved to be. I imagined a young Mike the Fox standing by my computer, and I asked him, "Do you want me to draw for you?" And pictured him nodding. I walked over and imagined taking his hand. "Did you always want to do this, young Mike?" And he would nod at me. I sat down and pictured him standing behind me, smiling, and I drew for him. I had to do this process every day for 4, 5, 6 months. And eventually, the young me that I was imagining became just me. And every time I draw now, it's a win over the past trauma, which is why I love to do it so much. Like I said, this took months, and I would force myself to do it for a half hour a day. Usually, after my timer went off, I immediately quit. I did my 30 minutes of drawing, I did my little therapy, and I'd go watch YouTube immediately. But it got easier and easier over time. By, the 4th, 5th month, drawing was a deeply rewarding thing that I craved to do. This is how I overcame my motivation problem, just as an example, and I hope it helps you with yours, should you have one. And that's where I'll end part 1 of this video here. When we return, I'll discuss patience and focus in detail. There's a lot to unpack there before we get started drawing comics. As always, this is Mike the Fox, and you can do this. You are a beautiful person with a beautiful story to tell. And for your homework, tell someone a story this week. Even if it's just in the comments of this video, to your stuffed animals, to your social media timeline, to a friend, tell someone a story. See how it feels. Until then, please subscribe for more and share if you found this helpful. Love y'all. Bye-bye.